Hi, welcome back to week 7 lectures. This week we have moved into the medieval era of philosophy. We have treated some aspects of the ancient period of philosophy, and we're able to look into some of the ancient philosophers and their philosophies. The development of philosophy in the process of our learning has grown into the next stage, which is the medieval period of philosophy. In the medieval period of philosophy, there is the play of faith and reason in attaining true knowledge and reality. And there is the presence of the belief in God and in Christian God in identifying what is responsible for all things, both in the nature and in human experiences. In our week's lecture, week 7, we shall be looking into the philosophy of Augustine, who is a medieval philosopher. We shall look into his experiences, his influences, and his philosophy. Augustine was born in Tagaste, in the province of Numidia, in the African continent, in 354 AD. Now, the Numidian was the kingdom of the Numidians that is located in the northwest Africa, initially comprising the territory that now makes up the modern day Algeria, but later it expanded across what is today known as Tunisia, Libya, and some parts of Morocco. His father, Patricus, was a pagan. Of course, we all know what and who a pagan is. While his mother, Monica, was a devout Christian. So a pagan, his father, who is a pagan, does not believe in the Christian God. And his wife, Monica, believes in the Christian God. Now, Augustine's mother instilled in Augustine the ways of Christian thought and behavior, and that influenced him so much. Augustine began the study of rhetoric at his early age of 16. His personal experiences led him to this unique approach to philosophy. So he had very individualistic experiences that made him begin to look at philosophy from the perspective that he did. His Christian ideas seemed unsatisfactory to him. He was particularly perplexed by the ever-present problem of evil in nature. So he sees evil in nature, and he wonders why there is evil in nature, with all the Christian teachings that God is all good and all powerful and all merciful. So why do we have the evil that we have in nature? How can one explain the existence of evil in human experience? Augustine asks. The Christians had said that God is the creator of all things, and God is good. How then is it possible for evil to arise out of a world that is perfectly good, that God had created? This was what was in Augustine's mind. The teachings of the Christians was that God is good. And if God is good, where did the evil come from? In nature. And Augustine could not understand that. He could not find any answer from the Christian perspective he learned as a youth. So Christianity was unable to proffer a convincing answer to Augustine why there is evil in the world when God, who created this world, is good. And so this made him turn to a group called the Manichaeans. The Manichaeans reject the basic monotheistic belief of the Old Testament and the doctrine that the creator and redeemer of humanity is one and the same. This is the teaching of the Manichaeans. This is a group of people, a school of thought that preaches, that teaches that humanity and of course creation has one supernatural entity and it's the same. It's not different. So instead, they taught a doctrine of dualism. The Manichaeans rejected the teaching, the Christian teaching, that creation has only one supernatural being. The Manichaeans, on the other hand, taught a doctrine of dualism, according to which there are two basic principles in the universe: the principle of light or good, and the principle of darkness or evil. This is in contradistinction to the teachings of Christianity. Christianity does not have this dualistic view of creation. For Christianity, it is monotheistic. One being, one supernatural being, one supernatural force, one supernatural energy, one supernatural principle. But the Manichaeans have these dual principles to the creation account. These principles are equally eternal and in conflict with each other. This conflict was reflected in human life between the soul, which they looked at as the light. They described the human soul as the light, and the body, which they described as darkness. The Manichaeans' doctrine seemed to resolve the problem of evil in the world, and as a matter of fact, it made sense, because the Christian doctrine was unable to justify why there was evil in the universe, in nature, in the world, even though it was created by an all-powerful, good God. The Manichaeans said there is a different energy that is evil in itself, and that principle, that energy, is responsible for evil in nature. And that made some sense, a lot of sense, for Augustine. So the Manichaeans' doctrine seemed to resolve this problem of evil in the world, but then it opened the door and the windows for new problems to arise. How could one explain why there are two conflicting principles in nature in the first place? If no convincing reason could be given, is it then possible to have intellectual certitude? One would ask. So the Manichaeans had already established that we have these two basic principles to the creation account: the principle of good and the principle of evil. But then they never answered the question of how could one explain why there is these two principles in the first place? Why would there be these conflicting principles of good and evil? And if we are able to give a convincing reason, does it then mean that intellectual certitude is not possible? We can't be certain of anything intellectually. But the Manichaeans could not give an answer to this. They were unable to answer this question. And so Augustine broke away from them and joined another school of thought called the Skeptics. So this school of thought holds that we cannot know anything for certain. So you see skepticism coming in the light of the development of philosophy. This school of thought had been existing as at the time of the development of philosophy. And their teaching is different from the Christian teaching, and it is different from the Manichaeans' teaching. Their teaching is that the human mind cannot conceive, cannot understand anything for certitude. We should doubt everything, the skeptics will say. He maintained a materialistic view of things. At this point, Augustine began to maintain a materialistic view of things. He doubted the existence of immaterial substances and the immortality of the soul. And he was hoping for a more effective career in rhetoric, which was the career in which he moved into. Now, Augustine left Africa and moved to Rome. Shortly after, he dabbled into skepticism. Then he moved to Milan, where he became professor of rhetoric in 384 AD. Here, he was greatly influenced by a Christian bishop called Ambrose, who was then a Christian bishop in Milan, in Rome, in Italy. From Ambrose, Augustine derived a greater appreciation of Christianity. It was here in Milan that Augustine was influenced by Platonism, especially Neoplatonism, which was found in the book of Plotinus called the Enneads. Neoplatonism has the belief of an immaterial world, completely separated from the material world, and the belief that people have a spiritual sense that enables them to know God and His immaterial world. Augustine from here also derived the notion that evil is not a positive reality, but a privation, which is the absence of good. Evil is not a positive reality, but it's a privation, a removal of good from reality. His dramatic conversion to Christianity occurred in 386 AD, when he gave his real consent to abandoning his profession of rhetoric and giving his total life to the pursuit of Christianity and of philosophy, as a matter of fact, which for him also meant the knowledge of God. Augustine now saw Platonism and Christianity as virtually one and the same, seeing in Neoplatonism the philosophical expression of Christianity. For Augustine, true philosophy was inconceivable without a confluence of faith and reason. To him, Wisdom was Christian belief. Every philosophical notion developed by Augustine pointed to one way or another to the problem of the humanity's moral condition, in clarifying for humanity the sure road to happiness, which is the goal of human behavior. Now, what differentiates Augustine from Aristotle is that Aristotle said that happiness can be achieved when a person fulfills natural functions through a well-behaved and balanced life. For Augustine, happiness is required that a person goes beyond the natural to the supernatural. There is a purely natural person. There is no purely natural person, because nature did not produce humans. God did. And so it is normal that humans seek happiness. And when they do so, it is a manifestation of their incompleteness. So what is Augustine trying to explain here? Augustine is saying that there is no natural person because humans are not a product of nature. Instead, humans are. A human being is a product of God. So it is normal for a human person, for a human being, to seek happiness. And the very fact that a human person, a human being, seeks happiness demonstrates that this human person yearns for completeness. This human individual is only expressing incompleteness. Humans can only find happiness in God, according to Augustine. Augustine elaborated his aspect of humanity's nature through his doctrine of love. To love is to go beyond oneself and fasten one's affection upon an object of love. This is the way Augustine explains and expresses what love is. And he was trying to explain that humans can only find the happiness in God using this platform of his theory of love. For Augustine, there are a variety of objects that people choose to love, reflecting the variety of ways in which people are incomplete, of course, in the inside. A person can love a physical object. A person can love another person. And a person can love oneself. For Augustine, these three ways are ways in which a human person expresses how he or she is incomplete. Augustine explains that all things are legitimately objects of love and are good, because all things come from God, who is goodness itself. Augustine continues to explain that nothing is evil in itself. Evil is an absence of something, which of course it's good, something, a good thing. And the absence of a good thing becomes evil. Humanity's problem consists in the manner in which they attach themselves to these objects of love. You see where the problem of mankind originates from. The manner in which we as humans attach ourselves to these objects of love. Either we are loving a physical object, Either we are loving another person or we are loving ourselves. The manner for which and at which we express this love and attach ourselves to this love, for Augustine, is the problem that humanity has. Happiness, misery, and restlessness are as a result of disordered love for Augustine. So what constitutes the chief fact about humans is that the range of their needs includes not only objects, other peoples, themselves, but also God. So what is Augustine trying to explain? He's only trying to say that the foundation of humans loving and having this happiness is not only humans' attachment to these objects of love, or humans' attachment to another person, another human that he or she loves, or even the love of oneself. But what constitutes the foundation of this happiness is when a human person also realizes that it is God that needs to be loved. Human needs cannot be met by an interchange of objects. So the basic need for a human affection cannot be satisfied by things. Of course, human beings are insatiable by nature. So this is the case with humanity's spiritual need. The nature of humans was made in a way that only God can provide that ultimate happiness in a human's life. And why would God be the only option for that? Because for Augustine, human beings, ab initio, from the beginning, were created and made by God. So only God can substitute for that yearning of happiness. Only God can provide that happiness in the life of a human person, in the life of a human being. And so, no person or object can substitute for God. When people love objects, other people's, or themselves for the sake of achieving ultimate happiness, then it becomes a disordered love. This is the way Augustine looks at what he describes as a disordered love. This disordered love is the reason for the problems that humans have, according to Augustine. And so again, when people love these objects, or when people love other people, or when they love themselves, for the sake of achieving this happiness, then it ends up in a disordered love. Disordered love consists in expecting more from an object than it is capable of providing. When you expect so much from your object of love than the object is able to give you, then that love becomes a disordered love. Because your object of love is unable to provide the kind of love that you want from it, then what it will give you will become a disordered love. And when it gives you that disordered love, you will not attain, you will not achieve that ultimate happiness that you yearn for, that you seek for. So a person's love for one another can become destructive of the other person, because the lover tries to derive from that relationship more than it can possibly give. And that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, right? So according to Augustine, it does not take long for disordered love to produce a disordered person. And a disordered person produces a disordered community. And the chain is simple to understand. So when you love an object, when you love a person, when you love yourself, so much so that you want to derive that ultimate happiness from that relationship, and you're not getting it, you're not having that happiness that you so much desire and yearn for, that love becomes a disordered love. You still become unhappy. You are not complete. You are still yearning for that peace of mind. You are still yearning for that happiness because your object of love is unable to give you the kind of love that you're looking for. And then when you have this disordered love, you become a disordered individual. You become a disordered person. You can't function the way you ought to, the way you should function. And then when you become disordered because your love, the object of your love, cannot give you the kind of love that you want, it affects your community. So you see where it trickles down from, where it goes down from. It affects the community. And because it affects the community, there becomes problems in the community. The community begin to have issues, will begin to have problems. Because the human beings in the community are disordered. And they are disordered because they cannot actually find that happiness that they are looking for in their objects of love. And then there is problem in nature. And this is Augustine's perspective of explaining why there is problem in the universe. Augustine, however, disagrees with Plato that the cause of evil is ignorance. Augustine argues that people must choose to turn toward God or turn away from God. They are free to choose. This turning away or turning to are not forced by voluntary actions. They are not forced, but they are voluntary actions. So when an individual decides to turn away from God or to turn to God, it is an act of intention, an intentional act. It is an act that is willfully done. It's a voluntary act. It is not done under duress. It is not done by force. Evil or sin, for Augustine, is a product of the will, the human will, a product of choice. And it is not ignorance, as Plato had said. For Plato, there is evil in nature because humans are ignorant of the good. And so they don't know, and because they don't know, evil grows. For Augustine says that is not the case. Augustine is an advocate of free will, that people choose to do what they do, and their choice of their actions gives birth to either evil or good. So, whereas evil is caused by an act of free will, virtue, on the other hand, is caused by God's grace. So, at this point, Augustine had become a Christian philosopher. Remember, he was influenced by the Bishop of Milan, Ambrose. And the Bishop of Milan, Ambrose, was a Christian bishop. And that was a turning around, a turning point in the philosophy of Augustine. He began to unite philosophy with Christianity. Augustine also insisted that sin is quelled when it is beaten down by the love of God, which none but He gives, and He only, by Jesus Christ, the mediator of God and man, who made Himself mortal, that we might be made eternal. So for Augustine, sin is conquered when humans begin to love God, who is their creator. And when we choose, when we turn to God and begin to love God, we will begin to have that happiness that we so yearn for, we so desire, we so wish to have. And that happiness will then overcome the power of the dark, which the Manichaeans had preached earlier about the two principles, the principle of light and the principle of the dark. And when this happiness overcomes the power of the dark, then good thrives, good wins. And at that point, there is peace and joy in nature, at least human nature. There is peace and joy in human nature, in the life of a human person, in the life of a human being, and in everything that concerns human being. This, in a nutshell, is Augustine's perspective of his moral principle, his moral philosophy. There are open doors for more questions on the philosophy, the moral philosophy of Augustine. A lot of philosophers came on board and began to question some of the teachings of Augustine. And as we proceed, we shall find some of these philosophers and some of their teachings to puncture some of the standings and teachings of the philosophy, the moral philosophy of Augustine. It is at this point that we'll come to the end of today's class. And I wish you all the best. Take care of yourself and each other. Bye for now.